The morning my mother-in-law slid a manila envelope across the kitchen table and told me to sign, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I had been waiting for exactly this moment for 11 months and I had been ready for every single second of it. Let me back up. My husband passed away in March of last year. Cardiac arrest. He was 41 years old and he was the healthiest person I knew. Ran 5 miles every morning, never drank, ate like a nutritionist, personally supervised every meal. The doctor said it can happen to anyone. I know that's true. I've read everything there is to read about sudden cardiac death in otherwise healthy adults. It still doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it ever will. His name was Theodore. Everyone called him Theo. We had been married for 6 years, and before that we dated for 3. And before that we were the kind of strangers who kept running into each other at the same coffee shop until one of us finally said something. That was him. He said something. I was too stubborn and too scared to be the one to start, but he walked right up and asked if I always ordered the same thing every single day, and I said yes, and he said him too, and that was it. That was the whole beginning. We built something together. A real life. We bought a house in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, a 4-bedroom craftsman with a front porch that got afternoon light and a backyard that backed up to a creek. We had plans for that backyard. A garden. Maybe a fire pit. We talked about it every spring and never quite got around to it, and now I think about that unfinished conversation more than I probably should. Theo had a life insurance policy. A significant one, just over $800,000. He had taken it out before we married, updated the beneficiary after our wedding. It named me. His will, drafted by an estate attorney he trusted, left me the house, the joint accounts, and his personal assets. Everything was in order. He was methodical that way. He made lists, he planned ahead. He loved me in a very practical, organized way, and I used to tease him about it, and now I would give anything to have him hand me another color-coded spreadsheet. His family had a different understanding of how things should go. His mother, I'll call her what she was, my mother-in-law, lived 40 minutes away in Westerville. His brother, 2 years younger than Theo, had never quite settled into anything stable. He'd had a series of jobs, a series of apartments, a short-lived landscaping business that folded inside of 8 months. He was not a bad person, exactly, but he had a very clear sense that the world owed him something, and after Theo died, that sense sharpened considerably and aimed itself directly at me. The first call came 3 weeks after the funeral. My mother-in-law, voice soft and careful, asking how I was holding up, how I was sleeping, whether I'd had any time to look through Theo's things. I told her I was taking it one day at a time. She said, of course, take all the time you need. And then, almost as an afterthought, had I given any thought yet to what Theo would have wanted for his family? I didn't respond to that. I said I missed him every day. She said she did too. The second call came 2 weeks after that. This one was different, less soft. She mentioned that Theo had always talked about taking care of his brother, that the two of them had discussed it, that there were certain expectations within the family that she hoped I would honor out of respect for her son's memory. I asked her when Theo had said this. She said she couldn't remember exactly, just that he had, more than once. I knew my husband. I knew how he talked, how he planned, how he made decisions. If Theo had wanted his brother to receive a portion of his estate, it would have been written down. It would have been in the will. It would have been on a spreadsheet with 3 different color-coded columns. Nothing. There was nothing. I work as a licensed CPA. I've been in accounting for 9 years, the last 4 specializing in forensic work, fraud examination, financial investigations, litigation support. I know how money moves. I know how people lie about money. I know exactly what it looks like when someone decides they're owed something they have no legal claim to. I also know how to document everything. After that second phone call, I started keeping records. Date, time, summary of conversation. I saved every voicemail. I screenshot every text. I wasn't sure yet if I would ever need any of it. But I had been doing this kind of work long enough to know that when something feels like the beginning of a scheme, it usually is. By September, 6 months after Theo died, the tone had shifted from grief to grievance. My mother-in-law stopped asking how I was sleeping. She started asking pointed questions about the house, the policy, the accounts. She mentioned, twice, that she had helped Theo with the down payment years before we were together. $20,000, she said. Alone, she said, though Theo had never once mentioned it, and there was no paperwork, no record of any repayment arrangement. Nothing. I found out later, through a mutual friend who felt I deserved to know, that my brother-in-law had been telling people in the family that I had manipulated Theo into changing his beneficiaries, that I had isolated him from his family, that I had, in some vague but sinister way, taken advantage of a good man. I had been married to that good man for 6 years. I had held his hand in the emergency room. I had planned his funeral. I had sat in our bedroom for 3 weeks after he died and could not make myself move his pillow to the other side of the bed. And now I was being painted as the villain. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't have a name. The grief of being misrepresented by people who knew you, who sat at your table and ate your food and hugged you at the cemetery. I felt it all through that fall. I felt it like a second loss, quieter than the first, but somehow sharper. I didn't respond to the rumors. I didn't call my mother-in-law to argue. I went to work. I ran my 3 miles. I cooked dinner for one and tried to remember what it felt like to cook for two. I made my lists. I planned ahead. I suppose I had learned more from Theo than I realized. In November, I received a formal letter, not from my mother-in-law directly, but from an attorney she had retained. It stated that the family intended to contest the validity of Theo's will on the grounds of undue influence. It requested that I voluntarily relinquish the marital home and negotiate a settlement regarding the life insurance proceeds in the spirit of honoring the decedent's true intentions. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I called my own attorney. Her name is Miss Hargrove. She has been practicing estate law in Ohio for 22 years, and she has the kind of calm that makes you feel like whatever is happening is manageable, even when it isn't. She read the letter and told me that undue influence claims are exceptionally difficult to prove when the decedent was of sound mind, had an established relationship with the beneficiary, and had a documented history of intentional estate planning, which Theo had in every possible way. She told me we would respond and we would defend, and she told me to stop being afraid. I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. I was afraid of losing the house. Afraid of losing the last physical place where Theo and I had lived as a family. Afraid of what it would mean to walk away from the craftsman with the afternoon porch light because people who never cared about him in any consistent way had decided in his absence that they deserved what he built. But I stopped letting the fear make my decisions. The weeks that followed were what I can only describe as a full-time job on top of my full-time job. I gathered every financial record. I pulled bank statements, tax filings, the original mortgage documents, records of every joint account we had opened together. I obtained, through my attorney, Theo's estate planning file from his attorney, which included notes from their consultations. Theo had been meticulous, as always, about articulating his intentions. I documented the family's communications. I tracked every instance of pressure, every veiled threat, every attempt to reframe my husband's wishes as something other than what they clearly were. In February, nearly a year after Theo died, my mother-in-law called and asked if we could meet in person. Just the two of us, she said. Just to talk. She missed me, she said. She missed having me in her life. I agreed. I brought nothing except my phone in my pocket and the recording app I had turned on before I walked through her front door. We sat at her kitchen table. She made coffee. She talked about Theo for a while, the kind of talking that feels like love but is actually softening, and I let her because I genuinely did miss my husband. And some part of what she was saying about him was true. And then, after about 20 minutes, she slid the manila envelope across the table. Inside was a quitclaim deed for the house, and a letter agreeing to release 60% of the life insurance proceeds to the family estate. She wanted me to sign both. I looked at the documents for a moment. I looked at her. "I'm not going to sign these," I said. She had been prepared for this. Her voice didn't waver. She told me that I didn't understand the position I was in, that the lawsuit would be expensive and exhausting, and that I would spend the next 3 years of my grief fighting in court instead of healing. That Theo's brother needed stability, that she was his mother and she needed to know her son was taken care of, that Theo would have wanted this. I told her that Theo had left an extremely clear document outlining exactly what he wanted and that I trusted his judgment. She told me I was being selfish. She told me that no one in the family would ever forgive me. She told me that I had always been more concerned with money than with people, which is a remarkable thing to say to someone who is currently refusing to hand over $800,000 and a house. And then she stood up and she pointed at me across the kitchen table. Not a slap, not like the video that inspired this, but close, the way a pointed finger at close range is its own kind of blow. And she said, "You don't belong to this family anymore. You never did. And we are going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." The room was very quiet after that. I reached into my pocket and turned off the recording app. 63 minutes, the whole conversation. I told her I was sorry for her loss. I meant it genuinely, because she had lost her son, and that is a pain I would not wish on anyone. I told her I would continue to grieve Theo in the way that honored him best, which was to respect what he had chosen to put in writing, and then I got up and drove home. What happened next took several months, and I won't pretend it was easy. The legal process rarely is. My mother-in-law's attorney filed the will contest in probate court. My attorney filed our response. The recording from the kitchen table meeting became part of my documentation, not the smoking gun, but part of a broader picture of a sustained campaign of pressure and misrepresentation. The piece that changed everything was actually something my forensic background found. Going through old financial records, I discovered that the $20,000 loan my mother-in-law claimed she had made to Theo had in fact been a gift, designated as such in a letter she had written at the time, a letter she had apparently forgotten existed. I had found it in a box of Theo's documents while looking for something else entirely. My attorney submitted it to the court. There is a particular look that I imagine crosses someone's face when they realize that the one piece of leverage they thought they had has just been removed from the board. I did not see that look in person. I heard about it secondhand from my attorney, who told me that opposing counsel had requested a brief recess and then had called her the following morning to discuss settlement. The settlement was simple. The family dropped the will contest. I kept the house. I kept the life insurance proceeds. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue a harassment claim based on the 11 months of documented pressure and the recorded conversation. My attorney advised me this was fair. I trusted her judgment. My brother-in-law called me once after it was over. I don't know what he expected. I let it go to voicemail. I have not listened to the message. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. The Craftsman house still has afternoon light on the front porch. I planted the garden this past spring. Not the exact design Theo and I had talked about, because I didn't remember all the details. But something close. Tomatoes and herbs along the south fence, a raised bed for zucchini that I planted too many of, which Theo definitely would have teased me about. I put in a small stone fire pit in the fall, the kind you can buy in sections at the hardware store and assemble yourself on a Saturday morning. I sat by it the first night I had it lit, with a blanket and a glass of wine and the kind of quiet that you have to get used to before it becomes peaceful. I thought about what it cost to hold on to something that was mine. The sleepless nights, the documents, the legal fees, the months of being called selfish and manipulative by people who loved my husband in their way and were also, in their way, trying to take from me what he had left behind. I thought about Theo making his lists, choosing his attorney, updating his beneficiary, doing the quiet practical work of making sure that if something happened to him, I would not be left alone and unprotected. He couldn't have known what his family would do, but he planned for it anyway. That was who he was. The greatest thing I learned through all of it wasn't about estate law, or forensic accounting, or how to document a harassment campaign. Though I learned all of those things, What I learned was that love, real love, prepares. It makes arrangements. It puts things in writing. It builds a wall around the person it loves, even when it can't be there to defend it in person. I tend that garden every week. I sit by that fire pit when the evenings are cool enough. And every morning before I leave for work, I stand on the front porch for a minute in the afternoon light that comes too early in the day and is actually morning light, which I never corrected him about because it made him happy to call it that. I let him have that one. I'll let him have it still. There's something I keep coming back to even now. Standing in the garden Theo and I never got around to planting while he was alive. The people who came after what he left me. They believed they would win because they were louder. Because they had more anger, more grievance, more certainty that the world owed them something. And for a long time, that loudness felt like power. It felt like something I couldn't match. But here's what I've learned about how things actually play out. Not in the movies, not in some tidy version of justice, but in real life with real paperwork and real court dates and real exhaustion, the outcome almost always reflects the choices people made long before the confrontation happened. My mother-in-law signed a letter years ago calling that money a gift. She made that choice. Theo sat with an estate attorney and documented every intention clearly and carefully. He made that choice. I spent 11 months recording dates and saving voicemails and building a file instead of firing back on the phone. I made that choice. None of us knew in those moments exactly what we were setting in motion, but every single choice showed up eventually. That's not fate, that's not luck. That's just cause and effect, playing out on a longer timeline than we're comfortable with. What I keep thinking about is the difference between the two approaches in that kitchen. My mother-in-law brought pressure. I brought documentation. She brought emotion she mistook for leverage. I brought the actual letter, the one she had forgotten she wrote. And when those two things met in a legal proceeding, there was only one possible outcome. Not because I deserved to win in some cosmic sense, but because I had done the work to understand what was real and what wasn't, and I had stayed inside the truth the entire time. Theo was like that. He was the most methodical person I have ever known, and I used to find it a little exhausting, honestly. The spreadsheets, the contingency plans, the way he always wanted to have a folder for everything. I understand now that what looked like caution was actually a form of caring. He was thinking ahead to situations he hoped would never come. He was building protection he hoped I would never need. That kind of foresight, the willingness to do the quiet, unglamorous work before the crisis arrives, is something I underestimated my entire adult life until I needed it desperately and found that he had already done it for me. I think about the version of me who might have just signed those papers to make it stop, who was tired enough and grief-stricken enough in those first weeks that she might have told herself it wasn't worth the fight. That version didn't disappear. She was there every step of the way, exhausted and scared and sometimes genuinely unsure. The difference was that I kept deciding, one day at a time, to stay clear-headed about what was real, to understand the situation as it actually was, not as it was being presented to me, and to keep going even when keeping going felt like the harder thing. Those three things: doing right even when no one is watching, understanding clearly even when clarity is painful, and continuing forward even when it would be easier to stop. I did not always have them in equal measure, but I kept reaching for them. And I think that reaching is what actually matters. The garden is growing, the fire pit is exactly the right size, and the morning light still comes through the front porch in a way that Theo always insisted on calling afternoon light because it made him happy. I'm still letting him have that one.